I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, on a day that marks Thanksgiving in the United States, and apparently the day Ukraine was given to agree to a peace deal, although Donald Trump has walked that deadline back, Russia has denied leaking the phone call in which Steve Witkoff coached Vladimir Putin's top aides on how to flatter Donald Trump. We examine whether Marco Rubio's apparent call for a peace deal to be signed before the US agrees to any security guarantees for Ukraine is at all deliverable, and we report how Moldovan authorities have tried to give the Russian ambassador his drone back after it had violated Moldovan airspace and landed on a roof during Moscow's latest mass aerial attack on Ukraine. And later, we hear the views of the Ukrainian public and their reaction to this week's extraordinary events.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Thursday, the 27th of November, 3 years and 278 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by the Telegraph's executive editor for audio, Francis Dearnley, and Spectator staff writer, Svetlana Morenets. We started with the latest political developments. Francis, Politico is reporting today that US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has told European allies that the United States will only discuss long-term security guarantees for Ukraine after a peace deal is signed, which doesn't sound like much of a guarantee to me. And I also note that Bridget Brink, the former US ambassador to Ukraine, speaking to NPR, said there is no indication that Russia wants a deal, and that's the whole point, that peace at any price, which is what appears to be our position as the United States, is not peace. So some kind of mixed messages, but a bit of grumbling coming out of the States. What's the latest?
Thanks, Dom. I know many of you at home will agree with that sentiment, and I'll come to Rubio's reported stance in a moment on what is, theoretically, deadline day, when President Trump threatened to cut off military and intelligence support to Kyiv unless it signed a peace proposal, which many interpreted, of course, as a capitulation document. But first, more on those leaked phone calls in which US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff coached Putin's most senior foreign policy aide, Yuri Ushakov, on how to flatter Trump. Moscow's denied that they had anything to do with that leak. Of course they would. With Ushakov himself giving an interview to Russia's Kommersant newspaper, where he said he speaks with Witkoff quite often through secure communications and WhatsApp. Now, the Wall Street Journal reports that senior officials in the Trump administration believe the WhatsApp leak was from a foreign intelligence agency, likely one based in Europe, that was targeting a phone utilised by Ushakov. They think the call was recorded by Russia's GRU originally, which was then accessed by somebody else and then leaked. Some believe it was the British, others the Ukrainians. In normal times, Witkoff would almost certainly have been sacked, but these are, of course, not normal times. Just how serious his intervention was, arranging the call between Trump and Putin just before President Zelensky arrived in Washington, is underscored by the New York Post today, which argues in that call, Putin threatened Trump not to send Tomahawk missiles to Kyiv, something that was allegedly, and I emphasise that word, on the cards. Our friends at The Insider also confirm, contrary to claims from officials in both the US and Moscow, that the original 28-point draft, allegedly written by American negotiators with input from Dmitriev, is at its core a recycled Russian document that The Insider was shown several months ago by a source close to the Russian government. A number of key concepts of the plan are in fact pulled from the prior version, which was originally written by Dmitriev not long after Trump returned to the White House in late January. To quote the historian Timothy Snyder this week, Witkoff is not buying the Russian narrative, he's selling it. The leak has taken some of the wind out of the peace process this week. The deadline set by Trump, which in his own words he was suggesting would be pushed back, appears to be slipping further into the distance. For Europe, that will come as a considerable relief. But that's not to say that there aren't developments, with reports coming in from several sources, as you allude to, Dom, that the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio told European allies that the US wants a peace deal before it agrees to any security guarantees for Ukraine. That comes from a European diplomat and a person with knowledge of the conversations. As Politico reports, quote, "The situation is changing rapidly and European allies are scrambling to understand the multiple messages from the administration. Rubio told allies security guarantees for Ukraine are a priority for the administration and an issue separate from other points of discussion that have already been agreed on, and he wants an entire package done quickly." Rubio also mentioned security assurances to Ukraine during negotiations last weekend in Geneva, but did not offer detail or reiterate the offer during a call with the British and French. The Secretary also broadly mentioned several other issues to address after a deal, which the Europeans took to mean Ukrainian territorial integrity and frozen Russian assets. The State Department refuted the portrayal of Rubio's comments. Secretary Rubio, along with the entire Trump administration, has clearly underscored that security guarantees would need to be part of any peace deal, as he has consistently outlined in both public and private, said a State Department spokesperson. The White House also insisted any final peace plan will have security guarantees. We'll link, of course, to that piece in Politico. I have to say, it makes me wonder whether the Americans want there to be effectively a two-part peace plan. The first agreeing to certain principles, a framework, which they can get signed quickly and point to as a triumph. And the second taking much longer to finalise, but which actually includes the substance of a final deal. But that assumes that there is enough common ground for all sides to agree to. And that is a big assumption, not least because many believe, unlike Witkoff, that the Kremlin has no intention of stopping the war. Yet there's no evidence of further pressure from the US coming down the track. Dan Driscoll, the Army Secretary, apparently told Ukraine that Washington will not help fix the situation on the battlefield, saying the US and NATO have limited opportunities to change the unfavourable situation. We don't believe that's true. As discussed multiple times on the podcast, there are many things the US alone could do beyond direct military action, which would almost certainly compel Russia to feel the need to negotiate meaningfully. Tatiana Stanovaya, senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, who I cited last week, offers a few interesting points of analysis on the Kremlin's calculations. She writes, Moscow faces a serious structural problem. Whom should it actually talk to on the American side? Witkoff is convenient and receptive to Russian ideas, but he is bureaucratically isolated and politically fragile. He takes well-known Russian positions, repackages them, and watches them die almost immediately. Trump himself refuses to dive into details. Rubio is unenthusiastic about Russian input and struggles to find common ground with Lavrov. As for Driscoll, he arrived in Abu Dhabi rather naively hoping to meet Russian counterparts. He left empty-handed because he simply wasn't talking to the right people. The Kremlin still doesn't know in what capacity he's acting or what mandate he actually carries. There's no question, she continues, that the 28-point plan reflects a large share of Russian priorities. Yet problems remain. Some clauses directly contradict core Russian demands, e.g. the permitted size of the Ukrainian army, the absence of a total ban on long-range weapons. The wording leaves considerable latitude for interpretation and risks being substantially diluted once implementation begins. Moscow doesn't even know what document we're talking about. The 19-point paper itself is not finalised because Zelensky still needs to raise several acute issues directly with Trump. The Kremlin wants an official, written text with clear status that it can work from. For now, it is simply waiting. So some interesting analysis there. Just to wrap up the political developments, we were hearing from our Brussels correspondent Joe Barnes earlier in the week that there's some agitation in Europe to unfreeze the Russian state assets in their respective countries before mid-December, though there's no guarantee it will be unlocked even then. Well, according to Bloomberg, the EU is preparing a legal document to secure some kind of reparations loan, jolting the long-stalled €140 billion plan to back Kyiv. The next step, said Ursula von der Leyen, is that the Commission is ready to present the legal text. Bloomberg says that will be released within days. Now just imagine if Brussels had managed to utilise the frozen assets in that meeting when it was blocked by Belgium. Kyiv would be in a much stronger position at this moment. Now, the slow bureaucratic process of the EU is in danger of debating a redundant issue in December. Many will wonder, why isn't that vote being accelerated? And just a final word on the reparations loan. You'll recall Adderley's interview with Hugo Dixon recently, one of the architects of that idea. He's now arguing the EU needs to rethink the exact mechanism it's proposing because the US peace plan risks the bloc being coerced to unfreeze Russian assets as part of that deal. That would knock a hole in the Commission's version of the reparations loan, as the EU or its member states would be on the hook to pay up to Moscow over 210 billion euros. He claims there is a type of reparations loan that could both get Belgium on board and cut the risk of Russia getting its cash back. And we'll link in the show notes to the article where they discuss that in detail. One last story, because I know Svetlana's going to discuss the ongoing corruption scandal later. Rustem Umerov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defence Council, has been questioned by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU, in that case. 8 suspects have now been charged. Umerov was summoned to NABU as a witness to provide testimony in an investigation into alleged interference in the activities of the state official, according to his press service. The conversation was constructive, the press service said. Umerov answered all the investigative questions in accordance with procedural law. And that, Dom, is where we are in the political realm today.
Thanks, Francis. Right, let's dive into the military side. Let's go into the Donbass. Russian forces are pushing hard across the whole of the front line, but we'll focus on the Donbass now. All this activity is pegged, no doubt, to the diplomatic manoeuvres of the week. There's been no significant change to the FIBA. You'll see that phrase out and about, the forward edge of the battle area, the front line, if you like. But there are reports of attempted Russian infiltration operations, i.e. sneaking about on motorbikes and on foot, that kind of thing, in Vovchansk and Kupiansk in the northeast, also in the vicinity of Liman and slightly to the southeast of there, Siversk in the Donbass, and down in Huliopol in Zaporizhia Oblast. But into Pokrovsk, and Ukrainian forces recently recaptured key positions in the northwestern and western parts of the town during recent counterattacks. Russian sources confirmed counterattacks took place in northwest Pokrovsk. Both Russian and Ukrainian forces likely hold positions in the north. It is very chaotic. Geolocated footage published yesterday shows that Russian forces also infiltrated in positions in the northeast of the city. And it's thought that the Russia's Rubicon drone specialist unit is said to be working that open flank to the northwest, the bit that is still open-ish. Russia has not been able to completely encircle the city. The northwest sector is still open, but drones are working it hard, no doubt trying to cut Ukrainian logistic lines there. Ukraine's 7th Rapid Reaction Corps of the Air Assault Forces spokesperson, Sergei Olishev, said yesterday that Ukrainian forces maintain positions in Pokrovsk and the front line largely runs along the railway line, which basically goes east-west through the centre of the city. Across the country, 142 drones fired by Russia last night. 2/3 of them were brought down, but at least 18 areas were hit across the country. 9 days after that cruise missile strike on Ternopil in western Ukraine, freelance journalist Tim White, always worth a follow, he says another child has died of her injuries. That's the 35th person killed from that strike last night. A child who's aged 12. Her sister remains seriously ill in hospital, and the girl's mother is said to be one of the people killed in that strike. Now into Russia and Samara region of Russia. That's about 600 kilometers southeast of Moscow. It borders Kazakhstan. A lot of activity last night around the Novokubyashevsk oil refinery. Also, airports closed in southern Russia, quite a few in southern Russia, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, just north or running along basically the Georgian border. So you've got Sochi, that's on the Black Sea near Georgian border. Then you've got Vladikavkaz, that's 400 k's further east, just north of Georgia. Magas Airport in Ingushetia, 50 kilometers northeast from there, and Grozny, another 50 k's east of Magas, also closed down. So something very large, a large wave of drones, I would imagine, but I haven't seen any evidence backing that up, was active across the far south of Russia last night. Russia's MOD says it shot down 118 Ukrainian drones overnight. No video yet from Belgorod, but Tim White, that I was just referencing there, he says he's seen footage from the reliable independent news site Pepel reporting a missile had hit the Luk thermal power plant in Belgorod last night. The governor there says any damage is being assessed this morning. Now, we mentioned NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte talking yesterday about how Ukraine is receiving on average about $1 billion worth of military aid per month now through the Pearl mechanism, the prioritised Ukraine requirements list, the mechanism whereby Europe stumps up the cash, buys US kit, gives it to Ukraine. Well, he also, in that interview with El País, said Russia has no say or veto who cannot be a NATO member. He said, but within the alliance, membership requires unanimity. He's hinting there that many, including the United States, currently oppose Kyiv's entry. Lots of talk of Ukraine will join one day, but when that day is and when the membership action plan actually arrives at it is yet to be said. Now, in Russia, 8 defendants were sentenced to life imprisonment in the case of the explosion on the Crimean Bridge, the Kerch Bridge, you may remember, from October 2022. This was reported first on Radio Liberty. I saw it in a Ukrainian online site, Militani. Now, the Southern District Military Court in Rostov-on-Don in Russia found the defendants guilty of committing a terrorist act and illegal trafficking explosives in a trial that was held behind closed doors. According to the Russian investigation, the defendants acted as an organised group, allegedly on the instructions of Ukrainian special services. One of the defendants, St. Petersburg resident Oleg Antipov, is the owner of a company that provided the truck that exploded on the bridge. All the defendants said they did not know about the contents of the cargo. You'll remember that blast resulted in the collapse of 2 spans of the road part of the bridge and fires which lasted for quite a few days on the railway part that runs alongside. And just finally for me, Moldovan officials have confronted Russia's ambassador with a drone that violated the country's airspace and landed on a roof, thankfully without exploding, during that latest mass attack against Ukraine overnight Monday, Tuesday. So Moldovan news outlet Newsmaker said that Oleg Ozerov, who's Russia's ambassador to Moldova, was summoned to the foreign ministry yesterday and had to walk past the drone in question that had been placed on stilts outside the building. Mr. Ozerov reportedly claimed that there was no evidence the drone was Russian. OK, that's military and political updates. Now, we've been very conscious that all week it's generally been people sitting in London largely bringing you the news. So we are delighted to be able to speak to Svetlana Morinets again. Svetlana, you've been watching the news just as closely as we have been, but you've been speaking to a number of contacts, I understand, friends in Ukraine. What's been their reaction to events of recent days? Welcome back, Svetlana.
Thank you for having me again. Well, the last 2 weeks really hit the morale in Ukraine. The corruption scandal and the pressure from the Trump administration about peace talks and accepting the Russian peace deal discouraged many Ukrainians. I understand why the Trump administration decided to put pressure on Zelensky in this exactly moment, because his position was very vulnerable. But at the same time, they kind of helped him, because at the moment when the corruption scandal unfolded, the Ukrainian opposition and even members of the Zelensky own party were calling him to sack Andriy Yermak, the chief of his office, and also to probably sack everyone in his office and to form a united government, which opposition has been calling since last year probably. And Zelensky was supposed to have the meeting with his MPs, and he had it actually, but then the news broke out about 28-point peace plan, and all the focus that Ukrainians had on the corruption scandal shifted to the Russia problem, because for the majority of Ukrainians, the survival against Russian aggression is a priority, of course. But I would say that the corruption scandal is still affecting Zelensky team very much, especially the fact that he appointed Yermak as the head of the Ukrainian delegation negotiating the peace agreement. A lot of Ukrainian MPs didn't like that, and Ukrainians either. I mean, I would say that Yermak is the most unpopular person in Ukraine, and he drags Zelensky down. And if Zelensky were to fire Yermak, he would improve his position very much. I saw the last poll about how many people know about the corruption scandal, about who, if they know about Mindich and what have actually happened. And it showed that over 90% of responders said that they know about it. And so we should expect Zelensky's rating to fall, and in such a crucial time for Ukraine, it's not going to end well.
I was going to ask, so which one's getting the bigger chatter amongst your circles in Ukraine? Is it the ongoing corruption scandal, Yermak, Mindik, as you're talking there, or the 28-point plan, the 19-point plan, the Witkoff phone calls, etc., etc.? I know there's space to have both conversations, but it's all exhausting, and your friends, as you say, are exhausted in Ukraine. But which one is dominating the conversation?
I would say it's all together, but the corruption hit harder because for many years Ukrainians had a view of Zelensky that he was on their side, and every time when any corruption scandal broke out, he would immediately fire people involved and supported the investigation. But this time, when his close associates became involved, suddenly he became Stalin. He didn't rush to impose sanctions against Mindich. So people saw that reaction, and in that address that he recorded when the negotiations with the US started in front of his office in Kyiv. And he said, Ukrainians, stay united, stop arguing, it is not the time, because remember who the main enemy is. And it didn't land well in Ukraine. It didn't land as usual his speeches did before. To give you like simple example of the people say no, for example, one man I know has a sick father who can't walk. And because of that, he's supposed to have a booking from the conscription. He is not eligible because he has to take care of his father. But to receive that letter, he has to pay a bribe to the Ukrainian authorities, even if they come and they see the sick father, because there is an inspection that must visit and confirm that what he is saying is true. But anyway, they say, or you pay the bribe, or we conscript you. So cases like this are very well known in Ukraine, and there are many of them. And for that reason, people feel that they can't trust Zelensky's government anymore. And even among my friends, I hear voices that he should be more flexible about the peace deal. Of course, the majority of the Ukrainians want the final agreement to be just. But the exhaustion from the war, and taking into account that this winter is really the hardest, even in Kyiv, people spend more than 7 hours without electricity and water and heating. So the general consensus is that Ukraine should negotiate all it can and try to achieve peace. But the problem here, unfortunately, that Russia doesn't want it, and it doesn't depend on the Ukrainian government.
Yeah, I had lunch last week with a friend who lives in Kyiv, and she was showing me the app where she is told when the planned outages of power are going to be, so you can plan your life. But I mean, there's big blocks there every day. There's huge chunks of hours when there's not going to be any power. I mean, a lot of people have generators, but not everyone. It was just extraordinary. When I looked at it and I thought, my God, how do you life's busy enough as it is, but then to try and work it out around, well, I'm not going to have power then, and I've got to do this and that. It's just extraordinary.
My brother, he is 10, and at school, because of the winter right now, they have to study using the flashlights at school, the children, or when there is an air raid alert, they go to the bomb shelter with the flashlights. So it's really horrible how in what surroundings the children are growing up and in what conditions. And for example, my parents, we are looking to buy the power station so they can have some electricity, because the heating doesn't work without electricity. But they are lucky because they can chop some wood, and because they live in the village and they can make a fire. But that is not the case for people living in big cities, and especially in Kyiv, that is the main target of the Russian attacks.
Now, you said your friends are very clear they want a just peace, but you also said that they are now looking for Zelensky to be more flexible in his approach to peace deals. What does flexibility look like? What are they suggesting he could trade?
Well, I wouldn't like to generalize, because I wouldn't like to speak for them. But, for example, there are some concessions that they think that Ukraine could make. For example, even in that 28-point peace plan, there was that the Ukrainian army should be no more than 600,000 in the peacetime. So before Russia invaded, the Ukrainian army was less than 200,000. So to have 600,000 in the peacetime and also been able to afford to sustain that army, I mean, it's okay condition. Of course, the sovereign country shouldn't have any limits on the size of its army. But when we talk that for reaching a deal, we need to give up something, they consider things like those acceptable. I need to stress that I didn't see a single person saying that Ukraine should withdraw from the parts of Donbass that Russia couldn't capture. Everybody is against it. And any Ukrainian leader who would sign it, it would be a suicide for his political career. And also the Ukrainian parliament would never vote for it. Although I would say that Ukrainian opposition gained more voice with the corruption scandal, because before they were completely irrelevant. Zelensky controlled the government, and they would just vote his party and the coalition with the former pro-Russian parties. They would vote for all the laws together. But now even people in his party don't want to do it, and the opposition is blaming Zelensky for appointing bad diplomats to deal with the United States, because Russia found the right approach to get from the Trump administration what they want, and Ukraine is always struggling. But I don't completely agree with that position, because I think the problem is that Trump administration is just sympathizing Russia more than they care about Ukraine, and that's the initial problem. And in Ukraine, from the Trump administration, people want to see more of Marco Rubio. And it's a shame that Kit Kellogg is going to leave in January. And there is a feeling in Ukraine that there is almost no one left in the Trump administration who is more or less on Ukraine's side. Because even Marco Rubio, who at the beginning was saying the right things, right now he shrinked under the pressure from Trump, and he repeats everything what the Trump administration says.
You've mentioned quite a few of the big hitters there, Zelensky, Yermak, etc. But I hear that General Syrsky, Alexander Syrsky, the head of the armed forces, he's also back under the microscope of pressure. How precarious is his position?
So with Zelensky, unfortunately, the Ukrainian president right now values loyalty more than professionalism, and the criticism against Syrsky comes mostly from the brigade commanders who are directly in the front line. And the first criticism is that Syrsky keeps creating new brigades. He has an obsession with assault brigades, and he says that Ukrainians should keep pushing forward, that we should always try to recapture some land. The majority of the Ukrainian military consider that this doesn't make any sense and it is the waste of life. And what Ukraine should focus on is to stop Russians from advancing instead of trying to recapture some villages or install a flag, what they like to do in some village, to shoot it on a drone and to show, look, we installed the Ukrainian flag in that village, and they decided 50 people died to do that. The brigades are complaining that most of the people that are currently conscripted in Ukraine, Zelensky says it is 30,000 a month, they are being directed into those assault brigades. And other brigades who are not so in a good relationship with Zelensky's office, they don't receive new conscripts. So the number of people they have is constantly getting smaller, and they can't defend their sectors on the front line as well as they did before. And that's why we have Russian breakthroughs like it happened in the Zaporizhia near Gulay-Pola. Syrsky, he also likes to come to the brigades on the front line and try to control everything and instruct how they should fight. He comes directly to every brigade on the front line and tries to control everything. He focuses all the power in his hands, and he doesn't allow the decentralization when the commanders on the ground could decide what is the best thing to do. And also he's blamed for giving the orders for retreating too late, which leads to imminent losses. Last week, there was quite bizarre thing. The Syrsky's office, they published a map with updates from the front line, and on the map was Pokrovsk. And the line where the Russian forces were was like really far from the city. It was like the map from half a year ago or even more. And people were like, is it the current map that the Ukrainian commanders are using? Do they really think that Russians are not even inside of the city? Or they tried to show to the Ukrainian that everything is under control, or they are really delusional about what is happening because Russians are already north of the city. And Ukrainian troops should have been withdrawn from Myrnograd and Pokrovsk months ago. But we have what we have, the repeat of Avdiivka and Bakhmut, because after Bakhmut, Syrsky was called the Butcher of Ukraine. And he keeps confirming that nickname, and prominent Ukrainian military bloggers, for example, like Serhiy Sternenko, he has been calling for firing Syrsky and appointing actually someone more efficient, knowledgeable, younger, and not dependent on Zelensky.
Svetlana, always great to have you on the podcast. Very grateful for your reflections on these subjects today. I wanted to change tack slightly, and that's because recently, certainly in this country, but I think it also went international as well, you went viral, as it were, for a critique that you made of the remarks of a former member of Parliament for the Labour Party here, currently in government, now is no longer in that party, relating to Ukraine. And we've talked many times on the podcast about critiques that are made of Ukraine from the political right. And this was somebody from the political left, specifically the far left, on the subject of Ukraine, and trying to sort of weave in kind of our elements of class warfare into this. And I just wonder if you could summarise what her argument was and what your rebuttal was of that.
So you didn't name the person we are talking about. It is Zara Sultana. And to be honest, I didn't know about her existence before I saw on the former Twitter the video clip of her interview where she said that, of course, Putin is a dictator, but Zelensky isn't a friend of the working class either. And that really amazed me, that she tried to equalize Zelensky and Putin. Of course, Zelensky has his issues in Ukraine, but you can't compare a murderous dictator who invaded Ukraine and is killing hundreds of people every day and Zelensky. Also, all this rhetoric about class war, it's really not applicable in Ukraine. The majority of the Russian army are Russians who sign the military contracts voluntarily, and they go and kill Ukrainians for cash. And also, I consider the rhetoric that she said that Britain should leave NATO really dangerous. Of course, she is very privileged to talk about leaving NATO, living under the protection of NATO. But unfortunately, Ukraine doesn't have that privilege. So if she wants to see what happens when you give up your main defense assurance, when Ukraine give up its nuclear weapons, for example, she should come to Ukraine and see how it ended. So it was striking to hear those kind of voice in Britain, because I consider the United Kingdom really pro-Ukraine. It's been since 2022, except for some special figures from Reform. But it seems that British far left is moving in that direction too. It's really important to highlight that because it's a dangerous narrative, and to compare the Russian government with the Ukrainian government and blame like, no, it is the war between governments. It's really stupid. I'm sorry, but I can't find a different word. I told you, Francis, that I was hoping that she would reply something to me, but I guess not this time.
Well, thanks, Svetlana, for talking us through that. And we'll have a link in the show notes to the piece that, as I say, went viral in your rebuttal of her comments. I mention it just because I think it does speak to, as you just say, how the political fringes of the left and the right find critiques around Ukraine. And it's right, as you say, that we draw attention to those and challenge them whenever we can.
Final thought. So Svetlana, Francis, folks, what were you doing in May this year? History is coming out as fast right now. This occurred to me a couple of days ago. When I looked into it, I honestly thought this was at least 18 months ago. But it was only May this year when, if you remember, Putin ordered a 4-day ceasefire between May the 7th to the 11th. Do you remember he was saying to mark the end of the Second World War? That was what it was for. Absolutely, totally, 100% not to do with protecting his May the 9th May Day parade in Moscow. He was terrified that Ukraine was going to hit it with drones, missiles, all the rest of it. In his magnanimity, offered a 4-day ceasefire. And I was thinking about that because this whole business this week, this latest hectic week we've had, peace plans, negotiations, one of the first things if you are serious about peace, one of the first things you do is you make a gesture, or you are encouraged, corralled to make a gesture. So either Putin could have done this, or Donald Trump could have said, "Oi, chum, if you really are as serious as you say you are about this whole peace thingy, why don't you have a ceasefire?" I mean, the US has already demanded that of Zelensky. Zelensky said yes, he was up for a ceasefire. We know that Putin is capable of offering such a thing in his munificence, in his generosity. We know he is capable of crossing that line and agreeing to a ceasefire. We know that the Russian army can carry out such orders if demanded. So they could have a ceasefire. So why hasn't Trump called for a ceasefire? Just to show a bit of willing, even just a few days, to show a bit of willing around all these negotiations. Why hasn't Putin offered such a thing. It just strikes me as odd that the only person among the senior political figures involved in this right now that has actually talked and backed up the whole thing about a ceasefire is Zelensky. He said he's up for it. He's up for a ceasefire. Trump, he's talked about it a lot and done nothing about it. Putin, he has done one before. Absolutely, definitely, totally not to just protect his May Day parade. But my question to you folks, why hasn't Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin called a ceasefire? Francis, what's your final thoughts? Feel free to opine on that if you like.
Well, I think it's very easy to speculate as to why. I don't think he has any interest in having one, or indeed is taking these peace negotiations seriously at all.
Which
Mr.
one?
Putin.
Oh, right, okay.
I think Trump would like to think it was all being taken seriously, but I don't think he's looking at the details at all. And I think the more that we read into this, the more it seems that events overtook Witkoff and Mr. Trump, and they just sought to try and ride the wave. But now the wave is crashing against the wall, and they're not quite sure what to do about it.
But does Donald Trump now refrain from calling for a ceasefire because he knows that they'll be showing up? It'll be emperor's new clothes, and therefore, the relationship he wants with Putin is based on a lie.
If only it were that calculated. I imagine it's not even on his mind. I don't even think he's thinking about it. The fact that he's not even talking about ceasefires anymore, I just think it's not on his agenda. I think he's focused on the Epstein files, and I think he's focused on the domestic agenda in the United States. I've got a final thought, but I know Svetlana's keen to.
Yeah, we're keen to answer on that because you asked about May, but I was near Pokrovsk in April for Easter when Putin offered 3-day ceasefire, I guess, and he stopped launching missiles on Ukraine, but the fighting on the front line continued, the drone attacks continued, so the war continued. And back then, Trump was calling for a ceasefire, and Zelensky agreed. And when Alaska meeting happened, Trump was supposed to come out of that meeting and said, we agreed ceasefire, and then we're going to talk on the peace negotiations. But during those talks with Putin, Russia convinced Trump that they should negotiate without the ceasefire enforced because Ukraine would rearm, regroup, and attack. And of course, it is ridiculous, but since Alaska, Trump stopped talking about the ceasefire. Right before Alaska, he was still insisting on the ceasefire. So that shift was quite noticeable. As for Putin, I don't believe he would have signed even that 28 points peace deal in its original form. As he said last year, when nobody is shooting, nothing is happening, we are bored. His army is advancing on the front line. They're about to capture Pokrovsk if they aren't already holding it. So I don't see a single reason for him to agree to stop his war, and that's why I don't believe that any peace deal, unfortunately, is possible this year. Maybe next year if something changes, if the sanctions really affect Russia. But I don't believe it's going to happen by New Year. And also, as final thoughts, I wanted to add about the Russian frozen assets. The money question is really crucial right now for Kyiv. Ukraine needs at least $60 billion for next year, and Ukraine doesn't have the money. So unless Europe finds a way, or from each country will have to give some money from their own budget, or to use Russian frozen assets, which would be preferable for everyone, it would really help out Kyiv, because Ukraine is not sure if there will be enough money to pay even salaries for soldiers next year. So it's a really difficult situation, and another one where Zelensky has a lot of problems because he announced another initiative to pay 18 pounds to every Ukrainian, 1,000 hryvnias, like of winter support, like he did last year, and it is heavily criticized, and people say you should move this money to the army to buy some drones instead of giving 18 pounds to every Ukrainian. It's just senseless while the country doesn't have enough money for war.
You make a really interesting point about the money. I think I saw something about the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has pledged $15 billion, I think, for the next 2 years.
4 years.
4 years, 15 billion in 4 years.
4 years.
Okay,
a tiny amount.
Ukraine needs 60 billion a year.
Yes.
Okay. Francis, final thoughts?
Yeah, well, I give my final thoughts today to a listener who's written into the inbox. They asked to remain anonymous, and they wrote as follows. I grew up in Bosnia during the war in the 1990s. We were left completely to our own devices, and only after years of war and horrific atrocities took place did the international community get involved and force an end to the conflict. When they did, it appeared so effortless that I always wondered what took them so long. When Russia expanded their invasion of Ukraine in 2022, I was completely heartbroken and remember coming home feeling so down and telling my wife they're on their own, just as we were. I was surprised and impressed by the resistance and success of Ukrainians in making the Russian advance grind to a halt. I think that was instrumental in showing the rest of the world that fighting back against a superpower is not futile. And then the support started coming to Ukraine. Should the support have been even greater and faster? Yes, for sure. I guess I feel compelled to write just to say that I am in fact proud of what Europe, US and others have done so far to support Ukraine's just defence. However, Europe, US and others have shown they are willing to provide support, but only up to a point. I don't think that we will ever see a scenario where a country says, we'll delay building a new school or hospital and instead send more aid to Ukraine. But I think that's exactly what's needed to end this conflict. It requires sacrifice. I just hope they do it willingly and early, rather than waiting until there's no other choice and the conflict spreads.
Well, thanks, folks. That's us for today. Please do keep writing in. We do read every single message. Still just the three of us, me, Franco and Adders, wading through the inbox, so we can't reply to all of them, but they do all get read. I can assure you of that. Svetlana, lovely to see you again. Francis? Yeah, good to see you too. Right, folks, we'll be back tomorrow. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Francis and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons, to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Phil Atkins. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.